Then the traveler is summoned on his meditative journey by the mountains and the plains. Read 2 our pages, they say. Looking, he sees that the universal function and duty of mountains is of such grandeur and wisdom as to stupefy the intelligence. The mountains emerge from the earth by the command of their sustainer, thereby palliating the turmoil, anger, and rancor that arise from disturbances within the earth. As the mountains surge upward, the earth begins to breathe. It is delivered from harmful tremors and upheavals, and its tranquility as it pursues its duty of rotation is no longer disturbed. In the same way that masts are planted in ships to protect them from turbulence and preserve their balance, so too mountains are set up on the deck of the ship that is the earth, as masts and stores, as indicated by verses in the Quran of miraculous exposition, such as these. And the mountains as pegs. And we have cast down anchors. And the mountains, he anchored them. Then, too, there are stored up and preserved in the mountains all kinds of springs, waters, minerals, and other materials needed by animate beings, in such wise, skillful in generous and foreseeing a fashion, that they prove that they are the storehouses and warehouses and servants of one possessing infinite power, one possessing infinite wisdom. Deducing from these 2 examples the other duties and instances of wisdom, as great as mountains, of the mountains and plains, the traveler sees through the general instances of wisdom in them, and particularly in regard to the fashion in which all manner of things are stored up in them providentially, the testimony they give, and the divine unity they proclaim, declaring, "There is no God but He." A declaration as powerful and firm as the mountains, and vast and expansive as the plains. And he too says, "I believe in God." In expression of this meaning, it was said in the 5th degree of the first station, "There is no God but God, to the necessity of whose existence point all the mountains and plains together with what is in them and upon them, by the testimony of the sublimity, of the comprehensiveness, of the truth, of the storing up, administration, dissemination of seed, preservation, and regulation, a truth providential, dominical, vast, general, well-ordered and perfect, and to be observed." Then, while that traveler was traveling in his mind through the mountains and plains, the gate to the arboreal and vegetable realm was opened before him. He was summoned inside. "Come," they said, "inspect our realm and read our inscriptions." Entering, he saw that a splendid and well-adorned assembly for the proclamation of God's unity, and a circle for the mentioning of His names and the offering of thanks to Him, had been drawn up. He understood, for the very appearance of all trees and plants, that different species were proclaiming unanimously, "There is no God but He." For he perceived 3 great and general truths, indicating and proving that all fruit-giving trees and plants, with the tongue of their symmetrical and eloquent leaves, the phrases of their charming and loquacious flowers, the words of their well-ordered and well-spoken fruits, were testifying to God's glory and bearing witness that there is no God but He. The first. In the same way that in each of the plants and trees a deliberate bounty and generosity is to be seen in most obvious fashion, and a purposive liberality and munificence, so too it is to be seen in the totality of the trees and plants, with the brilliance of sunlight. The second. The wise and purposive distinction and differentiation, one that cannot in any way be attributed to chance, the deliberate and merciful adornment and giving forth of form, all of this is to be seen as clearly as daylight in the infinite varieties and species. They show themselves to be the works and embroideries of an all-wise Maker. The third. The opening and unfolding of all the separate members of the 100,000 species of that infinite realm, each in its own distinct fashion and shape, in the utmost order, equilibrium, and beauty, from well-defined, limited, simple, and solid seeds and grains, identical to each other or nearly so, they're emerging from those seeds in distinct and separate form with utter equilibrium, vitality, and wise purpose without the least error or mistake, is a truth more brilliant than the sun. The witnesses proving this truth are as numerous as the flowers, fruits, and leaves that emerge in the spring. So the traveler said, "Praise be to God for the blessings of belief." In expression of these truths and the testimony given to them, we said in the 6th degree of the first station, "There is no God but God, to the necessity of whose existence and unity points the consensus of all the species of trees and plants that are engaged in glorifying God, and speak with the eloquent and well-ordered words of their leaves, their loquacious and comely flowers, their well-ordered and well-spoken fruits, by the testimony of the sublimity of the comprehensiveness of the truth of bestowal, bounty, and generosity, done in purpose of mercy, and the truth of differentiation, adornment, and decoration, done with will and wisdom." Definite, too, is the indication given by the truth of the opening of all their symmetrical, adorned, distinct, variegated, and infinite forms, from seeds and grains that resemble and approximate each other, that are finite and limited. As this traveler through the cosmos proceeded on his meditative journey with increased eagerness and a bouquet of gnosis and faith, itself like a spring, gathered from the garden of the spring, there opened before his truth-perceiving intellect, his cognitive reason, the gate to the animal and bird realm. With hundreds of thousands of different voices and various tongues, he was invited to enter. Entering, he saw that all the animals and birds, and their different species, groups, and nations were proclaiming silently and aloud, "There is no God but He," and had thus turned the face of the earth into a vast place of invocation, an expansive assembly for the proclamation of God's glory. He saw each of them to be like an ode dedicated to God, a word proclaiming His glory, a letter indicating His mercy, each of them describing the Maker and offering him thanks and encomium. It was as if the senses, powers, members, and instruments of those animals and birds were orderly and balanced words, or perfect and disciplined expressions.